My name is Diane Ullman. I am from the University of Connecticut, and I work in leadership practice and teaching practice in Connecticut, but also across the United States as a consultant. What I'm going to talk to you about this morning is the concept of personalized learning, which is not probably a new term for any of you, but what I'm going to do this morning is talk to you about a particular definition of personalized learning and a way that it can play itself out in classrooms. And I want to point out, first of all, that what you see on the slide is the cover of the book. This is a book called Learning Personalized, and you'll notice that it says The Evolution of the Contemporary Classroom. And I point that out in the very beginning because what I want you to know is that I believe that the change towards the kind of education we present today to students and personalized learning is an evolution. It's not something that can happen overnight. It's something that we have to work at, we have to find a place to start, and then we have to understand the ideas and principles behind personalized learning and move ourselves forward in a very clear but steady and progressively movement towards personalized learning way. So I'm very pleased to be here to share what we have published in this book and also to help you make it concrete in terms of your own practice. Now, we only have a short time together this morning and there's a lot of material to cover, but I will try my best to stop at points to make sure if you have questions or if you want me to clarify or if you want to add something to the conversation, I would love to hear that as well. So I want to just start by telling you a little bit about myself. Okay, there's print up there that I don't recognize. But as I said, my name is Diane Ullman, and I come to this work and the whole idea of personalized learning with a very deep understanding that, or deep belief, I should say, that students in our classrooms today are faced with demands that have they're unprecedented in terms of what we've expected students to learn. We are thinking about 21st century skills, we're thinking about the world that these students will graduate into, and we know that we have to do a different job with students today than we have done in the past. And so personalized learning is one way to approach a new way of thinking about teaching and learning for children. What I want to know is, because we have a short time, I'm going to do this briefly, but I want to know who's in the room because it's important for me to be able to tailor my remarks to those of you who are in the room. So if you are a teacher in the classroom, could you please raise your hand? Okay, so the majority of you are teachers in the classroom. If you are a leader of a school, can you raise your hand? So a few of you. And if you work outside of schools, but work to support schools, either at the university level or as a consultant, great. Okay, so got a big table of those folks back there. There is a part of this for every one of you, but largely what I'm going to be talking to is the teachers in the room, because it is the teacher practice. What happens, as I call it, the Monday morning problem. For you, it would be the Sunday morning problem. What happens when you walk in the classroom and you are faced with students and you know that the world that they live in is very different from the world perhaps that you grew up in, the challenges they will face, the ways that if they are going to succeed in this world, what do they need? And so I'm going to speak to the teachers in the room, but I think by extrapolation, those of you who are not in the classroom can see the connections. Our goals this morning are straightforward, but I think they're straightforward goals, but probably complex in terms of delivery. First of all, I'm going to define personalized learning for you, and I'm going to do it in a way that is described from my point of view with my colleagues with whom I wrote this book. The term is used a lot, and it has different meanings. I was talking to somebody yesterday who basically, in their mind, personalized learning was the equivalent of 21st century skills. And I believe 21st century skills are a part of personalized learning, but not in its entirety. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time defining it, and then we're going to examine 8 elements that I think are very central to what happens between a teacher and a student in the classroom to make learning personalized. In the book, there are actually 12 elements, and on the sheet that I will refer to in a moment, there are actually 12. We don't have time this morning to go through all 12 elements, so I've selected the 8 that I think are most pertinent to classroom teaching. And then I want to end this session with giving you a chance to think about a place to start. I assume you're here because you're interested in personalized learning and perhaps want to get started by integrating some personalized learning into your teaching or leading practice. So I want to give you some ideas about places you might start, and I want to all along the way caution you that the shift from traditional education to personalized learning for students is a huge shift, and it can't be done overnight, and it can't be done in its entirety. I think my best advice is that as you hear about the elements, you begin to think about how these elements apply to you and where your practice is currently and how you might move forward. So with that, I want to point out the sheet that's on the table. There should be enough of these sheets for everyone. And there's information on 2 sides. On the back side is, this is adapted from the book, Personalized Learning. It is a comparison between, among the personalized learning, individualization, and differentiation. And I'll talk about those briefly so you can distinguish among the 3. On the other side are the elements of personalized learning. And I'm going to go through, as I said, 8 of the elements, but there are some that we're not going to have time for this morning. I'm going to point you to the element as I talk about it, and I'm going to ask you to think about where you are currently in your practice, and then think about where you might want to move in regards to that particular element. So a little bit of self-reflection when we get to the elements on this sheet. All right, are we ready to go? Okay. So the essential question for this session this morning is, how do we design space in our classrooms and schools and our homes to help all children develop and achieve their dreams? What do you think we mean by the word space? What do we mean by create space?
Maybe physical,
Could be physical space.
I mean, when we talk about physical,
There you go.
yeah, when we talk about physical, maybe we mean the seating plan. See how we arrange the students, the trainees, the recipients in the classroom. When we mean figuratively, space is maybe new horizons, broadening the cerebral cortex of the trainees and the neurons inside of the brains.
Thinking differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to join me and present up here? Because I think you got it. We're talking about physical space, how we work with students in the classroom. What are students sitting in rows looking up front at the teacher? Maybe sometime, but not much of the time. But it's also meaning, how do we think differently about our job as teachers? And how do students think differently about their job as learners? So this requires us to maybe put aside some of our existing notions about what a student should do and what a teacher should do and think differently. So learning in a contemporary world. So why are we moving towards personalized learning? Why is this a hot topic of a frequently used set of terms? Well, we know, first of all, that there are very complex problems in the world. And if we don't work with our students through their educational process to help them grasp what those problems are, have thoughts about solutions to those problems, we are going to set forth students who are not prepared for the very complex world that they're going to face. And we have often thought that students aren't ready to think about complex problems till they become adults. And the notion that we're talking about here is that students can grapple with very difficult problems during their educational process. The more they do, I think you heard about that this morning in the opening session through the comments from the IB individuals who spoke. Students are very capable of dealing with complex problems if we give them a chance. Learning is interdisciplinary in nature in our contemporary world. It doesn't work anymore to teach mathematics in isolation or science in isolation from literature and from an understanding of culture. These things are all intermixed, and we're really pushing towards creating an environment in the classroom that is interdisciplinary in nature, where students can see the connections. Why do I need to study science? Well, it's going to help me understand the problems of the world. It's going to help me understand some of the issues that are going on globally. So very interconnected in nature. Capacity to think and work interdependently. I know my son is trained as an engineer, and one of the things that he had to learn when he went to engineering school was that he had to work as a part of a team. It was, and it's true now that he is in his practice, you don't work in isolation very much in the world today. Teams are how people get work done. Working interdisciplinary and independently is a critical skill. I think students who graduate from our schools who don't know how to work with others are not going to succeed. A lot of the work that is done with teams. And grounded in authentic tasks. Students are eager to do work that matters. They're eager to do real work that they know matters to the world outside of school. And I think one of the influences that has made this shift for students is the access to technology and the access to what's going on around the world. So, just think for a minute, the students that you face, do you look at them as you begin your teaching, or if you're leading in a school, as you walk around the school and look in classrooms, do you see students truly excited about their learning, jumping out of their seats to engage with the teacher, to engage with their colleagues? This is the kind of learning that we're looking for, where students are so eager to learn and to produce and to be a part of the world that they can hardly wait to be a part of what's going on in school. That's what we're aiming towards. And I know in the classrooms that I look at, I don't see that very much. And I think our students are not going to be patient with us much longer. They want to have real, authentic work to do. They want to be able to collaborate with others, and they want to be able to focus on what's going on in the world outside of them. This is my dear colleague, Grant Wiggins, who unfortunately recently passed away, is an inspiration to so many of us. Is anybody here familiar with Grant Wiggins' work? He says the goal of schooling is not to get good at school. And I know that far too many cases where I'm from, students are worried about getting good at school. The goal of school is to get good at the demands of life. And I think personalized learning is a way to move from doing work in school to get through school and to please the teacher, to get good at life, to get good at what you need to do when you move beyond school. For too many, what we hope for our students often does not line up with the daily work that we assign to them. I think that teachers currently assign work to students in the best way they know how. And what we're hoping with personalized learning is that new ideas come to teachers in terms of how they might engage their students in a wholly different way in their educational process. The work that we have traditionally given students does not draw them into the educational process in the way that it needs to happen. And I love this quote. If you do a job where someone tells you exactly what to do, he will find someone cheaper than you to do it. It doesn't take a lot of thought, a lot of effort to be able to do exactly what somebody tells you to do. And yet our schools are stuck churning out kids, or our schools are churning out kids who are stuck looking for jobs where the boss tells them exactly what to do. Those jobs are disappearing. The jobs we want to prepare our students for are the jobs where they have to think, they have to create, they have to solve problems. They won't be able to do that unless they experience that through their schooling. The one who thinks learns. So personalized learning is moving towards a very thoughtful curriculum where students are pushed to develop understanding, to dig deep at problems, and to get below the surface, and to really engage personally in their work. And this quote by Tony Wagner, who I think is very smart about global education: "The world no longer cares how much you know. The world cares about what you can do with what you know." This, in essence, is what personalized learning is. It's developing students who can do something with what they know, not just carry around a body of facts. So here's the definition that we're working from this morning. Personalized learning is a progressively student-driven model. There is a very big cultural shift here. I know, and I'm imagining it's not all that different from you, but I've been in so many classrooms where the teacher is standing in front of the classroom and lecturing to students. I heard an anecdote this morning from somebody at my table at breakfast who said he had watched a lesson in another country, not Jordan and not the US, but in another country where students, the teacher for 90 minutes lectured in mathematics. And the students never had any work to do. They had to listen and take notes. This model says the teacher isn't going to be standing at the front of the room anymore doing all the work. The students are doing the work, and they're engaging in the material. And I want you to notice the word progressively, because it is a shift from a practice where the teacher stands in front of the room and delivers to where students are the real workers in the classroom, and that doesn't happen overnight. It's very hard, as I would imagine as a teacher, to be able to give over control of some of the learning process to your students. But that is the shift that we're asking you to make. And so progressively means that you can't do it all at once. You can't decide tomorrow morning, I'm going to do that, because that might create chaos in your classroom. What it means is gradually giving over the control in the classroom to students. So where students are deeply engaged in meaningful, authentic tasks and rigorous challenges to demonstrate desired outcomes. So that is our definition, and it is at its heart student-driven. And so if you're like me, when I first started thinking about personalized learning, I'm saying to myself, how in the world do we move to a place that classrooms are driven by students and not by teachers? The concept of that is really hard to begin to grapple with. Let's talk about some key differences, and this is on the one side of the sheet that's on your table. So the word individualization is something that we've been talking about in education for a very long time. Individualization is a system where students control the pace of the topic as well as when they demonstrate mastery. So in a classroom that is individualized, every student can progress at his or her own rate. They are given tasks at their level of learning, and they move along in the levels of learning as they show mastery. And so in this sense, the teacher provides the work for the student, watches to see when the student masters the work, and then moves the student along. So in some cases, teachers are able to provide individualized instruction in their classrooms, but it is still very teacher-driven, and the teacher is creating the materials for the students to work on. So while the student is moving along at his or her own pace, it is the material, the lessons, the decisions about what a student is going to learn are still determined solely by the teacher. Differentiation, which is based a lot in Carol Tomlinson's work, and I'm sure many of you have heard about differentiation. We ask our teachers to do a lot of differentiation in the classroom so that students with different modalities can learn. A student selects from a range of content, process, or product to meet the requirements. So you may ask a student, or you may tell a student, I've taught this concept, I've taught you about a concept in social studies. You can pick the way you want to demonstrate your learning. You can write a report, you can develop a PowerPoint presentation, you can create a brochure, but you get to choose how to demonstrate your learning. The teacher still is in charge of what the learning is and how the learning is designed and what the students are learning. And then, one example of differentiation is how they demonstrate their learning. Another way might be that one student might learn auditorily better than they learn visually, so the teacher might modify the materials so there's more auditory versus visual information. That's another way that differentiation can happen. Personalized learning, in our definition, is neither individualization nor differentiation. This is the essence of personalized learning as I'm describing it. First of all, it's about voice, and it's about who has a voice in the classroom. Whose voice matters. In so many classrooms, the teacher voice is the loudest, the longest, and the most powerful. In a personalized learning classroom, I want you to visualize the teacher stepping back and letting the student voice fill the room. It is the student who says, I want to engage, I want to learn, I want to be a part of this process. Co-creation. Student and teacher together decide the learning process. It's not the teacher making decisions about what the student needs, it's the teacher and the student together figuring out the learning process. Social construction. Students, I talked about this yesterday with adults, that learning is socially constructed for adults. It is also socially constructed for students. Students learn best when they're able to talk with peers, where they're able to discuss, where they're able to argue, where they're able to really deepen their understanding of concepts by working with others. And somebody in my session yesterday said, the research supports it, and I agree that students really do learn best when they can teach others, when they can talk with others, and they can work out their ideas out loud with other people around them. So socially constructed refers to that. So now you have a student who has a voice in the classroom, who is deciding with the teacher how their learning is going to progress, who is able to work with people both inside and outside the classroom. I failed to mention that. Not only working with peers in the classroom, but students learn by engaging in personalized learning. They engage with people outside the classroom too. They access resources that are not necessarily within the four walls of their school or their classroom. And lastly, in personalized learning, there is self-discovery, where students are asked to reflect on their own learning and the progression in learning, and to set learning targets for themselves going forward. So I hope you're getting the sense that personalized learning puts the student at the center and gives the student a lot of power and voice in terms of how their learning will progress. The result of this is really high levels of engagement and interest, intellectual engagement, physical engagement. So what you see is students who can't wait to get to school because this is where they get to thrive. You see, this is where students can't wait to meet their teacher and greet their teacher in the morning because they know they're going to have a chance to act upon their own passions, their own ideas, and their own interests. So I love these images. Students are no longer bystanders in their own education. They're not sitting in a seat waiting for the teacher to tell them what they're going to learn next, how they're going to learn it, how they're going to demonstrate their learning. They are a part of the decision-making process. And teachers are no longer doing the heavy lifting. In so many classrooms, as a principal, I used to walk around the school and the one question in my mind is, who's doing the work? If I go into a classroom, who's doing the work? If I saw the teacher doing all the heavy lifting, all of the work in that classroom, I could pretty well guarantee that student engagement was not very high. In a personalized learning classroom, teachers are no longer doing the heavy lifting. The students are working as hard or harder than the teacher. The teacher sets up the scenario for the student with them, but then the students are doing the work. And this is a huge shift for us in many classrooms. And I dare say, I think that elementary schools are better at this already than middle schools, than high schools. And as you progressively go up in the grades, you see it's more and more difficult for teachers to give the learning process over to students, and teachers are doing the majority of the hard work in the classroom. And finally, assignments are no longer bureaucratic exercises. I'm sure you've heard a student say, what do I need to do to get an A? What is it exactly you want from me so I can get the best grade, get the best result? And what they're doing is they're saying to you, this learning is for you, the teacher. It's not for me. It's not to expand my mind. It's not for me to get smarter. It's for me to please you. So what is it you want me to do? If you hear your students saying that, you can pretty well be sure that they're learning not for their own growth and development, but they're learning for you. And I think that's where we don't want to go with our students, that sense that school is all about pleasing my teacher and not growing my mind. So these are actual quotes. When we were writing the book, we asked students what they thought about schooling and about their world, and here's what they said to us. We want to do work that makes a difference to us in our world. These are the thoughts that are in their heads. They know that there's because I really do think because of all of the media that they have access to, they know that there's a complicated world out there. They know there's an exciting world out there. And they don't want to do school for the sake of doing school. They want to go to school to make a difference for themselves and for the world. They're very aware. We want to learn from the media of our times. I'll never forget, I remember walking into my daughter's classroom when she was in middle school, and I'm old-fashioned. I read a book, sometimes a hardcover book, not online. She had her computer open, and she had messages up here, and she had her cell phone over here, and she had her computer on, and she had a book open over here. And I started to scold her to say, you're not going to focus on your schoolwork. You have too many distractions. She says, no, Mom, this is all about my work. The textbook, the screen, the cell phone, the messages. She was talking to peers about the assignment. The media is how contemporary students learn. They are producing things, videos, they're producing texts, they're producing all sorts of things, and they use media very fluidly. And for those of us who come from a different world, we've got to make room for that, even if it doesn't fit our paradigm of what good schooling looks like. We want to do work that's relevant, meaningful, and authentic. These are actual words from students that we interviewed. We want to be engaged intellectually. Just talking to high school students, like, how hard are you having to work at school? Not very hard. They can get by without really using their minds well. We want stronger relationships with our teachers, with each other, and with our communities. So we hear these things from students. They're aware. If we don't recognize that this is what they're thinking about, we're going to miss the engagement. So I want to stop for a minute and see if you have any questions about what we mean by personalized learning before I jump into looking at each of the elements. We're going to do 8 of the elements. So I want to, good, question back here.
In our countries, people give the targets that the student have to have in this area. For example, when he is, for example, 11 years old, when he is 15 years old. What you're speaking about is that the kid make the targets and what he wants to do. How can we differentiate between students?
Okay, that is a very astute question, and I think it's kind of at the heart of how we design schools and classrooms for personalized learning. In our country, my country as well, there are targets that students have to hit at every grade level. So this is not, in the absence of those targets, this is saying, with those targets in mind, how are you going to get there? What's the learning process that will get you to master those targets? Because we all have targets. This is not education without focus and goals. This is saying, knowing that there are targets that every student has to meet, particularly in mathematics, in language, how do we get them there in a way that they stay highly engaged in their learning, that they are expanding their minds and engaging the whole world around them? So I'll talk a little bit, and if I don't fully explain it, I want to come back to that question, because that is at the heart of why it's hard to move from what we do today to this new world of personalized learning. It's exactly why it's very hard, because we live in a world where there's specific targets that students have to meet. We might call them targets, we might call them standards, we might call them grade level goals, but we know that we don't have choices about a lot of where students need to arrive at the end. We have a lot of choice about how to get them there. So I want you to, okay.
I don't need this. I just have comments. I mean, I was listening to what you were saying.
Yep.
I think we also have to connect everything we teach the students, to connect it to real life situations, to make sense to them. Otherwise, I think it will get, it will be lost. I think this is, in my understanding, this is partly how we personalize sometimes. Yeah. I mean, not all the time. I know you have 8 points that you're going to go through, but connecting things, whatever we teach to real life situations, is extremely, in my opinion, important.
Yeah, and I think you will see that flow through these elements, because it is exactly what they're asking us to do. They don't want to do school just to do school. And I think compliant students will do that. They will sit in the seat and they will do what you ask, but you're going to end up with students who haven't used their minds. They haven't stretched their thinking. They haven't grown. And when you connect to the real world, that's when they get excited, because then they know that their work means something. I think it has to do with the audience that they work for. It has to do with the task. You'll see it throughout here. So I just want you to take 2 minutes and turn to the person next to you and say, do I understand the differences between personalized learning, individualization, and differentiation? And so what is the difference among those three things? And just turn to the person next to you, just take 2 minutes, and then when those 2 minutes are done, I'll see if there are any questions still. Okay, let's come back together. Did this raise any questions that you want to ask? Are we good? Okay. So next we're going to move into the elements of personalized learning. On the flip side of the sheet on your table, there are 12 elements listed. I'm not going to go through all 12, and I'm also not going to go through them in the exact order that you see them. So there'll be a slide that will show you which element, and then you can refer to it on your paper. So I want to start by saying, before we get into the elements, that the content that we teach, and this refers to the comment about targets, the content that we teach is a tool. It's a tool so students can do work in the world. We give them mathematics skills, we give them science skills, we give them the ability to read literature, comprehend literature, analyze literature, and to come up with arguments and essays that demonstrate their thinking. So we give them tools, and content, academic content, is a tool. It's not an end in itself. So the fact that a student might learn quadratic equations is content, and it's a tool to do something. It's not an end in itself. And I think this is one of the major shifts. Yeah?
We have two aims here. One is cognitive, and the other one is metacognitive. I mean, it's not only knowledge. I'm seeking, I'm going beyond knowledge. So I want kind of sustainable learning, right?
Yes, that is true. We are going beyond just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. We're going to knowledge that you can use for purposes. And as we said back here, authentic purposes, purposes that connect to the real world. But I think this is a shift. This is a shift from what teachers currently think is that their content is the goal. Student learning of the content is the goal. And what we're saying here is that it is a tool. It is a toolbox. If we give students a really good, complete toolbox, they have everything they need to do real work. And so the content we teach them is just tools. But we have to ask ourselves, towards what end? Why do they need these tools? What are they going to do with the tools we give them? If they wait until they leave school to use the tools, those tools will be rusty. That'll be a box of rusty tools if we don't give them chances to use the tools to do real work while they're in school. Efficiency trumps everything, and as teachers, and I know I put myself in the same context, we try very hard to do our job and teach content to students. We know that knowledge is a collection of facts about the world and procedures for how to solve problems. So we teach students, we give them knowledge. The goal of schooling is to get these facts and procedures into the student's head, and we think sometimes that we've done a good job teaching if the students can tell us back what we taught them. Getting these facts and procedures into the student's head is not the goal where we're going, but it is oftentimes the place where we stop. Teachers know these facts and procedures, and their job is to transmit to students. I know that many, many really good teachers who get students to 100% mastery of curriculum feel very good about their jobs, and what we're saying to them now is, yes, you are good, but now take the next step and use that knowledge and those skills to do work. Simpler facts and procedures should be learned first. So this is kind of an intuitive sense of how we approach teaching. We should give the simpler tools and procedures first, and then we should follow on with the more complex work. Sometimes students don't need that progression. The way to determine the success of schooling is to test students to see how many facts and procedures they've required. No, the way to determine the success of schooling is to see what students can do with those facts and those procedures. So we build from the simple to the complex. Sometimes students are ready to jump to the complex because they may already have the simple, or they may intuitively know the simple and they want to do the complex. So there's a lot of flexibility in personalized learning, but schooling right now is often designed around what's efficient. And it's easier to have a sequence from simple to complex that we march through, as opposed to taking the students where they are. We also know that 21st century skills, I know there are other workshops here on 21st century skills. This one sort of makes me laugh a little because we're well into the 21st century, so it's not like these are new skills that we're thinking about. But critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, self-direction, problem solving, these are things that we know should be aims in education, and too often they are thought of as nice extras. So what we're going to do now is look at the second side of the page, and we're going to take one element at a time. And on the page there is a continuum. So if we take disciplinary outcomes to begin with, the continuum says if there's minimal student input, established standards dictate the content and skills to be learned. If there's some student input, some students have some choice within prescribed content and skills and established standards. A student-driven classroom, students determine the content and the skills they wish to learn, and this is the important part, within established standards. And this answers the gentleman's question in the back. There are standards. The negotiation of when and how a student learns those standards is something that happens between the teacher and the student. It isn't a prescribed, predetermined path and sequence. It's something that you know by the end of the year, and I think this is something we need to share with students. By the end of the year, you have to reach a certain point, but within this school year, you have lots of flexibility to choose ways that you're going to learn to reach those standards. We will work on that together, teacher and student, and we will be sure that by the end of the year, we are where you need to be so you can move on to the next level. And so it's this collaboration between teacher and student around those established standards that makes personalized learning different from what we're currently doing.
Thank you. What I find challenging with that is sometimes you've got subject-specific skills that the students themselves don't know what they are. So as a teacher, you know what they are, and what if when the students are, determining what they want to know in terms of a skill, how do you ensure that at the end they do the subject-specific skills that you as the, as the expert, the teacher, that they actually do it?
So I think part of the answer will come as we work our way through the elements, and when we look at task design, we see that it's a negotiation. This is not students get to decide everything on their own. This is a negotiation between teacher and student. And certainly let's look, as we work through the elements, I want to see if we answer that question by the time we're through the elements. But I want to emphasize that I'm not advocating that students are the drivers of everything in the classroom without teacher input, without guidance. So as a teacher, if you have subject-specific skills, then you have to help the student design their work and their tasks so that they're actually acquiring those skills. And let's look at that as we work through some of the elements. But you can see that there's a continuum on the elements, from minimal student input to some input to student-driven. And what I want you to do is kind of rate yourself where you are currently. And you can just put a 1, 2, or a 3 next to the element as we talk about it. And this is just a little bit of self-reflection and self-assessment. If you think, and so this, it says a teacher here and there. So if you're a teacher, and many of you are in this room, as a teacher, do I have isolated instances of student-driven practice in my classroom? Do I have pockets of practice? Like, have I just done dipped my toe in the water with student-driven? Do I have pockets of it where I've really pushed myself? Or do I have a lot of energy and direction and I'm moving in this way, in a very concerted way? So think about your own practice. Are you just testing out the waters and maybe trying a couple things? Are you have several pockets of areas where you've been able to do this kind of work with students, or are you going full steam ahead? And so it's a 1, 2, or a 3. Just rate yourself on the element. And so at the end of this, you will see where you stand in terms of each of the elements of personalized learning. So I just read through the element of disciplinary outcomes. And so a student-driven disciplinary we have disciplinary outcomes. That's the way our standards are written, largely. In some places they are interdisciplinary, but mostly they're content-based. They're mathematics, science, languages, the social studies, we have them, we know what they are. Good teachers have internalized the standards for their grade level. In a personalized learning situation, students determine the content and skills they wish to learn within those standards, but they do this collaboratively with the teacher. Because as our colleague over here said, teachers know best. Teachers know most deeply what it is that the mastery has to look like, and students don't have that knowledge. They just know what they're interested in. So there is a teacher role here, and it's a very important one. Also, cross-disciplinary outcomes, and those are the thinking skills that we are beginning to look at. So problem-solving, creativity, collaboration, communication, creative thinking, critical thinking, those are cross-disciplinary outcomes that we have to be mindful of as we're designing learning experiences, and they have to merge with our content. So too often, we give students isolated work, mathematics work, and it may be grounded in problem solving, but they don't know how that relates to other disciplines, and sometimes the cross-disciplinary outcomes can really help make that connection. So for instance, if you are teaching a literature unit and you have some disciplinary outcomes that you need to reach, maybe it's literary analysis, connecting that literary analysis with that in and of itself is critical thinking, but connecting that to some problem solving, for instance, that using that analysis to think about problem solving an issue that comes up in literature with other content areas would be one example. So cross-disciplinary outcomes as well as disciplinary outcomes should be one of the driving forces. So here are some examples. And I want you to help me think about this. So what's disciplinary and what's cross-disciplinary here? So if a task that a student is working on is to create a tribute to a personal or fictional hero through artwork, poetry, a letter, a eulogy, another form of acknowledgement, what kinds of disciplinary outcomes do you see in that task, meaning the content-based outcomes? Just name a couple of outcomes that you see that could be taught through that task.
Sure.
How to communicate ideas from a language perspective.
Yep. And that would be, what grade do you teach?
Grade 12.
Grade 12. So that might be a grade 12 disciplinary outcome. What other disciplinary outcome can you see in that task? No? Yeah?
A visual one as well, communication,
So tell me a
artwork.
little bit more. So in the visual arts?
The visual arts, yeah.
Okay, so what would an outcome be in the visual arts that you might get at through that task?
What outcome?
So what learning for students would be in that task that's visual?
You mean skill-based?
Yeah.
How to create an artwork, how to use lines, how to draw,
So might-
basically.
How to use lines, how to draw. So you have, do you teach art?
I'm a drama teacher.
Okay, you're a drama teacher. There's probably drama learnings in there. But in there, oh, sorry about that. Excuse me. Got a little involved with my hand there. In that first task, there also could be art outcomes or learning that you're responsible for at the grade level. Is there cross-disciplinary in terms of critical thinking, creative thinking? Can you see how those outcomes can be addressed in that first task? Okay. So could be language, it could be art. What else? What other disciplines could be addressed through that?
Educate. How you start with a level on how you
Okay. So, social studies?
Maybe.
Give me an example.
Maybe if you talk about the history of this person or this hero.
Okay. So that was a good example. It could be social studies. If the hero that you're talking about, you delve into the history. What did you say?
I was like saying, it might be a social. It might be related to more than one topic. It could be social, history, English speaking, all of the skills together integrated in one item. Depends on the students. It depends on what hero are they gonna pick, depending on their preferences, and what way of showing are they gonna use, depending on their skills.
So I think you're getting the idea here, which is starting with a task like that. It's a backwards map instead of a forwards map. If you begin to see, if you start with something like that and a student has a choice and a voice in what they do, who their hero is, how they create that tribute, they might, in this process, you're my student, I'm the teacher, and this is the task that we're working on, and you tell me who the hero is, and we talk about what disciplinary outcomes are necessary in your grade. What grade do you teach? Grade 1. Okay, well maybe a little bit adjusted here for grade 1. But we talk about Oh, darn, I'm so sorry. I need to put this down. I'm sorry. I'm going to definitely put this thing down while I'm waving my hands around. Yeah. Make sure you just signal me if you see me doing it. Okay, there we go, on the table. So you can begin to see that the task is driving what the students are learning. They get to have a voice in how they shape that task. They can pick whatever hero is a hero to them. The teacher is mindful of the disciplinary outcomes that have to be achieved and make sure that the teacher puts that in the process so that the student, teacher says, I can see that through this task you're going to be able to demonstrate your learning of these outcomes. So that's how you begin to design the work of the classroom so that you're very purposeful in driving towards what you know you're responsible for, but the student also gets very engaged. So what I want you to do...
Could you take it cross-curriculum, where in the sense that I'm more of a math teacher, I would have my students or give them the option of creating a timeline, and this way I can incorporate math in the same sense, where they're talking about their hero, but also learning years, how to take away years, maybe addition, subtraction of years.
Perfect example, and that is an example of cross-disciplinary, or working across disciplines. So the conversation between me, the teacher, and you, the student, might be that I think that your approach to that task is good. Could you also add a timeline so that you're beginning to get at some of your math outcomes? So what kinds of thinking does this require on the part of the teacher as you're beginning to design work for students that is not predetermined, but really is responsive to what students need? So I'm going to ask that question again, because I want you to turn to a partner and just talk about that. As you're thinking about this, and you're thinking from a teacher's point of view, what has to change in how you do your work to make this happen? So turn to the person next to you and say, if I'm thinking about doing this, what do I have to give up? And what do I have to add to my work to make this happen? Just a couple of minutes. Turn to a partner. All right, I'm going to ask a couple of individuals to share. I've heard some things, some conversation. I think you need more time. So how does your work what do you need to do as a teacher that's different than what you currently do in order to do this kind of work? And I want to start over here. Do you mind sharing what I overheard in your conversation about the research?
Well, if students define their own goals, not their own goals, sorry, their own project or what they want to show, it will require that teachers do a lot of their own research to keep up with the topics or subjects they want to go into. And then I just said, thank goodness for Google, because you will not be able to keep up with them if you only have the book, what you learned in school or what we have in our books.
So I think that's such an astute comment, because what it says is that teachers are no longer the source of all the information, right? You have to give up the fact that you have all the answers to be in a personalized learning world. You no longer are the source for students to turn to for answers. You teach them that answers are all around them. Sometimes the answers are in the other students in the classroom. Sometimes the answers are outside the classroom. But what a valuable lesson that is, to teach students to be resourceful about how to find what they need to know. So, and I think in the beginning it might be a little bit tough if you're the one who's been sort of in a command and control in the classroom. But in the end, it's very freeing to say, you know what, that's interesting and I'm not sure. How can you find out? Was there another comment over here? No. Okay. Anybody else? What else has to happen in changing your practice as a teacher?
We were giving an example because we're drama teachers and we're teaching the same topic. We're doing the history of theater for grade 8. And we were thinking that instead of giving them, we're saying, because we wanted to give them Greek theater and then Elizabethan and then shadow theater. So I think instead of giving them, so we're taking Greek theater and then Elizabethan, we tell them, look up the history of theater and what do you want to learn about. So it's more about what they're interested in. And assignments like the first one is a great way to figure that out, of what their interests are.
Yeah. So you're really pushing them to surface what they are interested in. Because that interest will drive motivation, and that motivation will drive performance, like they'll just soar.
Maybe speaking with other teachers, what goals they have, and putting them with my class and give them my goals too, so we can integrate our works and know what they want and what I want to incorporate them into our classes. And just living inside my class only and know nothing about other teachers, what they are doing now.
Oh, I love that comment, because what it says is that we're thinking about teaching as not being isolated either. So we're saying we don't want students to be looking to the teacher for the only answer. We want them to look around. This gentleman is saying, well, as a teacher, if I think I'm the only one, I need to talk to the people around me. And what a great model for your students. I mean, because that's what you're asking them to do. I'm going to move along here because we've got some ground to cover and the clock is ticking. So I'm going to skip through some of these. Task. If you look at that as an element, minimal student input, the teacher, the curriculum, computer-generated tasks. These are tasks that are just given to students to complete. That's in a minimal student input. Some student input, the teacher guides the definition and articulation of the problem, the idea, the design, and then the student has to do the work. But in a student-driven, personalized world, students independently define and articulate the idea, the problem, the design, or the investigation. And I think we've been talking about task as a real driver here. And so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on, I'm going to come back to this in the end. But students, the task matters tremendously that they're working on. And it's the task that really will get them excited. And from the task comes all of the other connections that you want to make. So given a very broad idea, like this one, how do I prove that I'm right or that someone else is wrong? And this is a very open-ended task, but can you see how this would invite a student to think about what they're interested in and how they want to approach this? Apply the construction of an argument to make a case or defeat someone else's based on logic, bias, cultural influence, experience, or evidence. Think about the thinking involved here. These are the cross-disciplinary outcomes, the problem solving, also the disciplinary connections here that you can see for this task. Should students have some say over the books this is an example of the right and wrong construction of an argument. Should students have some say over the books they read in class? The Green Bay Packers football team, it's a US example. Are they the best football team? Is it possible to end terrorism? So these are things that we can ask students that they can approach depending on their interests. These are just like, I would say these are prompts that students could come up with, but they could also come up with others that are their own. But the task is to construct an argument about something you care about and to construct that argument using logic, using a cultural context, et cetera. And so these are very wide open tasks. The job of the teacher in this instance is to start making the disciplinary connections, to make sure that the cross-disciplinary skills are embedded, and to negotiate that process with the student. So I asked you a moment ago what attributes or dispositions would teachers need to support student work. What attributes or dispositions would students need to be successful on these tasks? Think think about the students that currently sit in front of you, and what needs to change with the student in order for them to do this kind of work. Somebody over here says they have to inquire. They need to learn to ask questions. You know, we often say students enter kindergarten so enthusiastic about school, and they're curious, and they can't wait, and they want to learn. And then as each year goes on, they lose some of that. This is where they get it back. So curiosity, we have to awaken the curiosity that somehow has gotten buried over time. What else needs to happen with students if they're going to do this kind of work? You give them this open-ended task. It's going to be a stretch for students to free up their minds to begin thinking about, well, what am I interested? What do I care about? What do I want to, here, this one. What is it that I want to make an argument about? And, so many students have lost that passion. This kind of work can bring that passion alive. Anything else that you think students, how about perseverance? How hard do your students try? How much do they persist when it's really hard and they're struggling, or when they fail? I think that notion of being able to persist when things are difficult, or when you have to really stretch your mind, is something that we lose in our students far too early. Audience. In a personalized learning world, if there's minimal student input, the teacher is the primary audience for the student. And this is a compliance-driven classroom. This is where students mainly are working for the teacher. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to do it? How much do you want? What do I need to do to get an A? That's where the audience is the teacher exclusively. Student input has input into into or choice in audience. So some student input, we might have them write a letter to the editor of the newspaper. We might have them perform for an audience that of maybe younger peers. So we give them some choices. But in a student-driven situation, the student engages with an authentic audience to demonstrate learning and add value through contribution. Add value through contribution. What this is saying is that the work that students do adds value to the world around them through their contribution. As small as it might be for a first grade student, or as great as it might be for a 12th grade student. I heard that student on stage this morning talk about working for authentic audiences. She was talking about doing work in the world. And by the time our students get to 12th grade, they are longing to do work in the world that makes a difference. And so by helping them figure out what audience they can work for in school, not just me, the teacher, but who do they want to influence, we can engage them in personalized learning. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to move through some of these slides pretty quickly. Feedback. Yep. I got it. I have 10 minutes, right?
Well, they're supposed to get the break now. Break and that's it.
At 12.
11:30 to 12.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Like everybody's out, so.
Okay. All right. So I think I'm going to wrap up here because I know that it's your coffee break. I'm not going to go through. I think that the sheet that you have in front of you, I apologize for not judging the time appropriately. I thought I had from 10:30 to 12. And we didn't start. Yeah, we started late. Okay. I knew it was an hour and a half. So the elements are described, but I think that you're getting the sense of what personalized learning is, which is that it's really putting the student in the center and having choice about their work with some collaboration from the teacher. And this gentleman right here talks about mindsets. They're important. I'm just going to flip right to the end. I want to say to you that if you're looking for a place to begin with personalized learning, begin with the task. Because from that task, you can integrate your outcomes, you can integrate the disciplinary and interdisciplinary, you can begin to look at, creating an authentic audience, et cetera. So if you want to begin by working on the tasks that you give students, that would be very helpful. And the research supports personalized learning. By the way, you are going to, I think the QRTA is going to post these PowerPoints on the website. So there's some key research findings that I want you to have access to. I will ask them for sure to post it on the website. So this is an evolution. It won't happen overnight. But honestly, if you just start somewhere, you can begin moving in this direction. And first of all, I do want to apologize for not moving more quickly. I thought I had an hour and a half. Yeah, the session started late, but anyway. I'm really glad you were here this morning, and I know I'm talking fast, but the clock is ticking and people are at the door. So appreciate your time and attention this morning, and have a good rest of the day.